It's time to open our third eye, to awaken our experience of watching anime. We got the best episode yet. Animation breakdown, production value content from probably Pretentious. Let's get it.
Solo Leveling Season 2 Episode 6 was easily the best looking episode from this season and one of the best looking episodes across the entire show. It was an action spectacle filled with eye-catching animation highlights. Let's break down the visuals. As always, make sure to subscribe. This episode was directed and storyboarded by the one and only Takayuki Kikuchi. Kikuchi, for those of you who don't know, directed and storyboarded episode 11 from the previous season, and that was one of the best action episodes I've seen in a minute. It was phenomenal. It wasn't.
What's specific about Kikuchi again? Something about his usage of slow motion? That's one thing I remember.
Just the cool looking cuts, the flow, the overall structure of the action, the choreography. It was about as close to perfect as the 11th episode of a seasonal modern action anime can be. Some directors just get it, you know?
Yeah,
they have a knack for action direction, and Kikuchi, in my opinion, is one such director. Naturally, I was really looking forward to his work in this episode, and I'm glad to report it did not disappoint. I think we can safely assume that this was the episode, or in other words, it was high up on the priority list for.
That's right, but the craziest thing again, it's the episode for now. Might be 2 or more episodes. That might be the episode. But I wonder if those will actually be talked about, like episode 6, because no matter how amazing the episode quality could be, if the story-driven elements aren't there to hype it up and gas it up, maybe it won't get appreciated like episode 6.
The team. Again, that's just an assumption, but come on, just look at it. They gathered the entire squad for this episode. We had the aforementioned Takayuki Kikuchi, who in my opinion is the best action storyboard artist from the team.
Even better than Takeuchi? The one that's, running Villainous Oji-san? But he said from the team. Takeuchi is not part of this team, right? He got his own separate team, right? I'm just thinking of like, what's it called? I'm thinking of it like Strike Squads. Straight up, when I think about like these teams, I think of it in the perspective of Solo Leveling. You know how Hunters Guilds, they have like these parties, these strike teams? Basically, this is like an S rank, that's like an A to like S rank party right now.
He had Yoshihiro Kanno, the main action guy behind Solo Leveling. He is the main action animator / animation director for this series. We had Takafumi Tori, yet another fantastic action animator. He also doubled down as the action animation director for.
Again, fuck! There's the action director, and then there's the action animation director, and it is like, bro, they just sound the same, but they're different.
For this episode, we had Hajime Nakagawa, the guy with the unique art style, and many more. Long story short, this was a stacked episode, and naturally it looked incredible. Now, before we go through this thing scene by scene, let's address a few general things. Just like Kikuchi's episode 11, this episode featured a grand volumetric 3D space. The throne room was one big CGI background model, just
I loved it. I think they did a fantastic job portraying the depth, the sheer scale of the room, and the numbers of the orcs, and how the orcs were animated using CG. Looked pretty good to me.
Like that other throne room. And that's a good thing because Kikuchi is excellent at using 3D spaces to craft a grand volumetric action scene. His action storyboards are 3-dimensional and they.
What the hell does volumetric mean? Volumetric, relating to the measurement of volume. Basically, like, using the CG background. You know how everything is like rotating around and it just kind of gives you that like 3D immersion even though we're clearly watching a 2D medium? Volumetric, being able to fill that 3D like space using the CG even though you're restricted in the confinements of 2D animation.
They make fantastic use of 3D background components. And speaking of CGI, this episode used plenty of 3D models, which is understandable. Not only is animating all of these orcs by hand very difficult, it's unnecessary. Yes, season 1 for the most part featured 2D monsters, but as the scale and the scope of the story increases, the use of 3D becomes more justified.
Did the random shadow soldiers in the Igris, final couple episodes, were they CG or hand drawn? Because I think it makes sense to rely on CG when you're having to animate such a ridiculous amount of different, unique things, right? It's just so hard to hand draw all that shit.
The models themselves looked fine. They weren't exactly the pinnacle of anime CGI, but they were far, far from bad. The ultra-wide shots with multiple CGI characters fighting looked solid, and while
yeah, I mean, I obviously joked around a little bit about how, hey, these dudes aren't fucking moving, but some of them are moving, and the fact that it looks good, it doesn't look jarring, like random fucking what's the word? Like Sims characters just floating around in a space that just makes no sense. I thought that they were pretty well done. And again, just creates that grand scale of the battlefield that there's a lot of things going on.
Characters fighting looked solid, and while yes, a couple of CG heavy mid shots did look iffy, the overall...
Yeah, the reaction from the orcs here, this is probably the most quote unquote wonky moment when using CG. But usually a moment like this is the best that most other animes that uses CG and does really bad. This specific scene, you think Failure Frame can come close with their CG, bro? This, yes, looks a bit awkward, but still better than most what other people can do.
Heavy mid shots did look iffy. The overall CGI model use was solid. More about the behind the scenes circumstances. I'm sure things were smoother this time around compared to the previous episodes, but at the same time, I highly doubt things were smooth. The deadlines were probably more lenient by virtue of this being a high priority undertaking, but the staff list was messy, animation directors and second key animators galore, and
that's right. Whenever you have more ADs and in-betweeners or secondary animators means bad. Things are just being usually outsourced and a lot of people are trying to just rush everything, but this episode didn't feel like that. So this time, rather than the traditional way of having so much ADs and second animators involved in a rushed way, they did it in a good way?
And I think we are past the point where a solo leveling episode is produced smoothly. It's not about smooth and rough productions at this point. It's about very rough productions and somewhat less rough productions. Again, everything I said is speculative, but it's not hard to believe, is it? Anyway, that's enough rambling. Let's go through this episode. The opening segment featured a couple of cool ultra-wide shots and this fun high-angle perspective on a pickaxe of all things. Although I think the best thing to do would be to focus on the action. The first bit of which looked really cool. They kicked things off with these really well-drawn close-ups.
Love the faces.
I loved how extra the shading was.
The extra shading just completely sells the desperation and terror in these characters' faces. I loved it.
Faces looked expressive and they were moving.
The teeth, this specific way of making the upside down smile, the frown, showing the gums as well. You might not think too much of it, but I feel like showing the gums and the teeth like this with the extra shading and this upwards angle, it just sells that terror like crazy. And it's funny to think about the episode before, these dudes were all just aura farming, looking so cool. And that creates that gap that all those confident A-rank dudes are now shitting their pants.
Moving, looped movement yes, but movement nonetheless. Also a cool animated zoom out here, although it is slightly choppy. I loved this cut. Shots like these are extremely difficult to execute. They are highly prone to melting. Maintaining volume and line consistency.
The zoom out. Melting. The zoom out. Focus on Ki-hoon first, but you can clearly see that as the scene continues, you're zooming out and showing everyone behind. This is hard to do, huh? This is really hard to do, huh? Like this. This part, this is the zoom out. I didn't think that this would be hard, but it actually is. because of melting. Because things are now being proportioned differently, right? Because like in the beginning, you're close in, but you're zooming out now, and the proportions of that character now changes. That makes a lot more sense. To keep that shit consistent, to make it actually look good as you're zooming out. I never thought about it like that, but the more I think about it, that makes a lot of sense.
Although it is slightly choppy, I loved this cut. Shots like these are extremely difficult to execute. They are highly prone to melting. Maintaining volume and line consistency despite the tiny minuscule amount of change between frames is commendable. There are so many areas where this shot could have fallen apart. The keyframes could have been inconsistent, the cleanup could have been poor, the in-between animation could have fallen apart, but somehow every single department involved did their part. Also love the depth of field blur. It adds more volume.
Depth of field blur. Yeah. Like this area right over here, right? And to a lesser degree maybe here because it's shaded out, you can't see as much, but over here. Depth of field blur.
Of the depth of field blur, it adds more volume. This shot and the shot that followed were animated on ones and naturally they looked smooth. The wind effects in this cut were satisfying to look at, and the ground had these flickering speed lines which conveyed, well, speed. Movement. This shot was wonderfully dynamic. The storyboards used the 3D space to wrap the camera around him, followed by this exaggerated foreshortened perspective. The animated zoom into his eye was done on once,
I love the eyes.
It looked so good.
When he says done on ones, we're talking about the tempo, right? I don't know if FPS is the right way to say it, but there's like different tempos, timings, right? Of how many frames that you're adding in that specific like time interval, right? Animated
zoom into his eye was done on ones, and it looked so good. Something being animated on ones, in case you didn't know, means the frame rate is 24 or the
so that's why like lower frame rate doesn't mean bad. And yeah, that specific technique there, right, is the umayashiki eye. I can never remember the names, but I remember, there's the punch animation, right? Basically the exact same thing where you focus in on the punch instead of the eye. But lower frame rate doesn't mean bad. Sometimes it can really portray like extra like emphasis on certain things and just highlights it better. For this scene, right, it's the eye. Changing the tempo of the animation to really draw out more emphasis on a specific move. And right now, we're doing that umayashiki eye skill, right? Focusing on the eye. Looks sick.
good. Something being animated on ones, in case you didn't know, means the frame rate is 24 or that a unique drawing is used for a single frame. This landing made heavy use of blurring. He was completely blurred when he landed and came into focus as he slid towards the camera, which again conveys depth and volume. More dynamic CGI-aided shots followed. The throne is 3D here, so is the floor, and that allows the hypothetical camera to move around. You know how these work, you've seen early Attack on Titan. These relatively unimportant smoke clouds looked really good for some reason. They are blurred, but you can see the large amount of detail in these shapes. This cut features...
These are not CG smokes either, right? All hand-drawn smokes, right?
This cut featured these presumably digital speed lines which conveyed intensity. And
I fucking love speed lines. Basically, it gives me the same feeling of impact frames.
Lines which conveyed intensity, and this shot looked really cool, despite not doing much in terms of 2D animation.
I love how Kiwon falls down and the camera is like rotating, right? You can see he's enveloped in that cape as he's falling down. Out of the smoke he comes out, boom. And then he's falling down. But as he's falling, see how the camera's like rotating as he's opening his body up to us and we can see his face? And then Jinwoo just swoops on him. Even like the lighting here. As it falls down, oh yeah. The lighting gets brighter. Mostly because it's kind of focusing on, I guess, like this highlighted red part of the flag, but Jinwoo then swoops in.
Despite not doing much in terms of 2D animation thanks to the 3D background. A mandatory Sung looks really cool shot here.
I don't know about his face being completely just darkened in the shadows here though. You know what I mean? It looks cool, but I wonder if it could have been more impactful if it wasn't all just shaded out in one tone. I mean, there's a difference right behind the necks, right? In this area. That's crazy how sharp his fucking chin. Now, this is not the chin shadow. This is supposed to be like, you know, the like neckline. Also, bro. It's to make the eyes pop more. True. And speaking of the eye, I feel like we talked about in the aura analysis video, the manhwa versus the anime, where in the webtoon, they had a different type of like color of the eye that made it stand out more, because this kind of just looks like a bright flare, but in the manhwa, it really had that deep blue. Anyways, apparently, and I'm sure we're going to get to that frame later on too, I read a comment that was very clever. I wish I had the presence of mind to make that joke during the reaction. Bro is the neck romancer. There's a different frame that shows his neck even more longer and elongated. It's the frame where he's looking at you with only one eye shown with the other hair covering the other eye. But he's the neck romancer.
I think they are contractually obligated to include at least 15 of those every episode. Also worth noting, the smoke in the background is actually moving, despite the fact
the smoke is moving and there's debris coming out of the fucking smoke. To look at that. You see this? The little chunks of the rock and the above floor coming down. Like, you didn't have to do that, but they did. And it just kind of like gives you way more realistic immersion. Most people would never even realize this, right? But in the back of their mind, subconsciously, I'm sure all the different things are just ingrained in your brain. And even if you can't make it out in that moment, you can probably still feel like, whoa, this scene is cool. I don't know why though.
in the background is actually moving, despite the fact that it's neither in focus nor is it the focus. Amazing close-up here, the blacked out sections looked great. This episode featured plenty of well-drawn monsters. Don't let the CGI distract you from that fact. Some cool looking effects and a small but decent bit of character action.
The Kyoani hair ponytail tie. The ponytail tie. Very important scene. Oh my god. Oh my god. Look at that. Look at the level of detail in the ponytail tie. Very important.
Character acting then brought us to the main fight. Sung's shadows have these compositing filters added onto certain areas of their bodies, and they make the screen look a tad bit too busy, but it's not a big deal. You might look at a shot like this and go, oh, it was probably easy to animate since the orcs are 3D, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Firstly, Iron and Igris were hand-drawn, and secondly, they had to hand-draw a bunch of 2D effects. In this shot, for example, the orcs were 3D, but they switched to 2D following the impact frames. This was of course accompanied by tons of hand-drawn blood effects. Basically, they could make the orcs 3D, but animating them taking damage whilst using CGI was probably a bit too complicated, so they switched over to 2D for that stuff. This was one of the cooler action sequences from this episode.
I loved how it was kind of hard to make out exactly what he did, because he basically just went in there and sliced up everything. But you can clearly see him dropping down, obviously, right? Dropping down, and then the lines, right? The line movement, the tracing, like the cuts that he was doing. And I love how after he cuts, there's like a brief pause where you don't think anything really happened. But there's like a delayed explosion, you know, of everything being cut up and the blood splurring out. I thought it was so cool.
Cooler action sequences from this episode. Most of the movement existed in the form of smears and effects, but it was fun to look at. Another one of those volumetric foreshortened shots.
That's right. Kind of like, you know, makes him like the depth. He looks way more elongated here, foot leading in, face, torso, arms, a lot more disproportional to the rest of the body, but that's to give that, like, he's dropping down, you know? It gives the more of an oomph when coming down.
Shots here. Sung's legs look a lot longer compared to the rest of his body due to implied camera proximity, and the timing looked a bit Kanada-esque, so it was probably corrected by Takafumi Tori. The orcs were 3D in this shot, but if you pay attention, you'll notice that their models don't take any damage. 2D blood simply
Models don't take any damage because all the damage effects are hand drawn.
Blood simply appears on top of them. Not a fan of how choppy this part is, by the way. Sung's body turning was way too jumpy. It needed an extra.
Damn, we're nitpicking, but it's valid. I didn't even notice. This part was choppy. I was too caught up in, oh my god, what the fuck just happened? Whoa, blood popping everywhere. Little did I know, the Sung Jin-woo turnaround was choppy. This is the thing, right? To the uninitiated, you would never realize this shit. You could never. Maybe it's better that way. I don't know, but I'm just trying to tell you that there's levels to this, man. Like you think you know animation? No, you don't. I definitely don't. I'm starting to realize a little bit more and more as my third eye is becoming awakened more and more and becoming sentient step by step. But damn, I didn't. That's crazy.
Was way too jumpy. It needed an extra frame or two. A lot of
The only complaint that I have about this frame is the fact that Jinwoo does not have a big enough bulge in the pants. They should have made him packed here, bro.
jumpy. It needed an extra frame or two. A lot of these shots were volumetric. You could see the scope of the environment.
Yep,
The
love
shots showed the enormity of the throne room, and we can thank Kikuchi's storyboards for that. They were so three-dimensional, the shots didn't feel congested. This cut looked amazing. The shading on Sung switched to 4 tones as the glow from the flames appeared, and the effects looked nice. I'll probably end up setting a world record for the most uses of the word dynamic by the time I'm done with this episode, because look at this sequence.
So dynamic.
The camera zooms in, followed.
We need to get a thesaurus. We need to get a thesaurus. And then, basically, just type in dynamic. Alright, guys. Here's a different words that we could say. It was Nah, these are too strong masses. Activating. Yeah. What a very activating scene, huh? Very driving scene, right? The electric, very energizing, very I don't fucking know. Non-static. Yeah, whenever you run out of words and you run out of synonyms too, thinking about the opposite of it. What's the opposite of dynamic? Static. So instead of saying in a dynamic, you could say, wow, this is so non-static.
by a partial rotation around the smoke cloud.
Zippy? Wow, this scene is very zippy. I like the usage fluid, right? Dynamic, fluid, motion driven. Very what are other like gliding? just try to think more of like these different words.
Also, the smoke itself was lightly textured and looked nice.
It looked
Speaking
good.
of smoke, this cut featured tons of relatively detailed smoke.
Yep.
In fact, this entire section consisted of a large amount of effects, whether it's the debris, the smoke, or the fire. I will skip over those non-action scenes they threw in because they didn't have much going on in terms of animation, but
Okay.
I will praise this shot. The layout looks really voluminous.
Real volumetric again. What is volumetric about this shot? The depth of Guildmaster Che, leaning behind against the elevator, while you have this girl reminds me of a girl from Jujutsu Kaisen. It's the one that opened the simple domain. What was her name? The one that got really excited to get a picture with Gojo Satoru. She had blue hair. Miwa, yeah. The one that unironically survived an ultimate fucking jutsu, right? What was it? Was it an ultimate skill, ultimate curse? Didn't Geto... Sorry, it was not Geto. Bro literally ulted on Miwa for no reason and said Uzumaki. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why? Anyways, this girl reminds me of Miwa. Why? Hairstyle, kind of. It's different, right? Hers is more bangs right over here, right? Miwa doesn't really have these bangs. Her face also doesn't really make this kind of face. Just because she's wearing a suit. It's a similar hair structure, minus the bangs, and the suit. That's pretty much it.
Shot, the layout looks really volumetric. We then get to what is probably the animation highlight from this episode, and guess who animated it? That's right, Yoshihiro Kanno. Also, yes, this entire thing is one single cut. It's over 27 seconds long, and that alone is mind-blowing. Kanno is a
27-second cut. How long do you think it took them to make that single cut? A month? Is a month a crazy estimation? Am I undershooting right now? I feel like I'm not overshooting. Maybe a week? Really? Damn. They're just fucking efficient. I just remember that one Zenshu episode and talking about different cuts, and there was that one scene that was fucking crazy, but it wasn't that long. It was definitely not 27 seconds long, but it took them like more than like a couple weeks. Anyways.
Master of action animation and effects and timing and practically everything else, but those things in particular. The scene starts with this really well animated exchange of strikes. The characters.
Yes, Glade. I thought that maybe we were going to talk about the Attack on Titan-esque scene with Jinmu with the chain, but yeah, the iron into Igris into tank highlight reel.
Animated exchange of strikes. The characters have a large amount of detail, which makes the smooth animation so much more impressive. These thick smeary lines looked amazing as well. Kanno's grasp over timing is unmatched. The fast action is buffered perfectly by this well-drawn.
I love that, bro. Dude, literally, the beheaded head, right? Iron beheads the opponent. And then notice how the head then flops over. It's literally, the cameraman is basically moving right now, but using the head to kind of like lead in. There's also the grotesque nature of a head, like a decapitated head, literally bouncing on the ground as it goes in. But look at this shit. The head's still going, and it leads into the Igris moment. Like and then you get a slow motion, and then time slows down to really drive home what's gonna happen next. Like that sequence I thought was fucking such a sick transition.
Perfectly by this well-drawn slow motion shot. Also, there is a bit of blur thrown in, presumably to hide any potential inconsistencies in the drawing. This cut was really dynamic, by the way, because
dynamic used again. It was very zippy. It was very non-static. It was very fluid.
Of course, the scene here switches from an ultra-wide angle side profile to an ultra-wide high angle shot. Of course, the
low angle, high angle. High angle, because you could just plants the sword up. Didn't even realize that.
An ultra-wide high-angle shot. Of course, the characters were moving the entire time. The scene then went classic Kanno, with the choppier timing, the fast-paced, energetic exchange of strikes, and these high-energy flickering wind effects. Of course, the camera was going nuts throughout all of this. This impact frame sequence.
My favorite impact sequence. That's why I say, even though Iron Igris had longer scenes to pop off, what Tank did in these specific impact frames, that was very, very colorful. Fucking loved it.
This impact frame sequence near the end was excellent, obviously, but I'll be honest, it didn't exactly feel deserved.
What do you mean didn't feel deserved?
I don't think the movement that preceded it needed all that impact.
As in, he's saying Tank didn't deserve it because there's no real build up to it, which implies that those impact frames were godlike. It was fucking godlike, and it felt like an overkill to be used on Tank's small moments, which I'm perfectly fine with. Because again, those impact frames, I think it just, there's like this grisly nature, no pun intended, because it might be a grizzly bear, but it was such a grisly way of showing Tank the bear just biting down the orc.
The action simply consisted of this bear swiping down. A movement that simple didn't need impact frames.
I loved it though. Why not? Why not, dude? Pretty sure Kanno wanted those impact frames to be the payoff to several seconds of action, but me thinks the cut had way too much individual payoffs and breaks for that to work. To me, Tank is a very underappreciated character amongst the roster. Therefore, when Tank had that moment pop off, I was just really happy.
This grandiose. But hey, it looks good, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Really cool bit of character acting here. The snappy timing looks amazing. We got some more of that 3D background aided camera work, including this partial rotation. The animation here is so fluid and volumetric that the ice thing ends up melting a fair bit, which is fitting. You know, ice melting, really cool looking effects here, and the compositing around them was amazing as well. The colors really pop out. And speaking of colors popping out, this close-up was
this close-up, and it was also the camera angle I think was shaking a bit, right? When this is the 3 mages, Eye of Avarice. I think this is when he's about to get fucked up, right? Maybe it was not specifically in Quiz, but I loved how it zoomed in on his face. The color is so vibrant and great. All these extra shadings, right? And even the eyes, right? Look at this stuff. Like this basically could be dual wielding the, the eye technique. Not really, because it's, still showing the eyes, but the camera was like shaking. It was like shaking and zooming in to really, really drive home the fact that, Tusk, he shit in his pants.
Out, this close-up was phenomenal. The spiky, jagged effects looked incredible and the drawing quality was very high. Yes, the animation near the end was looped, but it looked amazing regardless. This explosion was another example of those volumetric ultra-wide shots I talked about. Storyboard artist Kikuchi used every opportunity he got to highlight the scale of the throne room. Speaking of which, really loved the scaling here. Also, the slow motion looks really cool. Again, for the millionth
Man, dynamic. Dynamic coming up. Love how the foot comes out of the smoke too. Look at that. Like this angle kind of really sells like how big Tusk got. But then what leads in? The foot comes out of the smoke. And you can see each, look at that. Look how like the smoke then is now enshrouded in between the grippers. Look at the feet animation, bro. Look at the smoke. Like he's coming out of the smoke and then the feet, right? I'm probably the only one obsessing about Tusk's feet right now.
Again, for the millionth time, Kikuchi is so good at storyboarding. We got a large amount of well-drawn effects around this section. The smoke looked amazing and the fire was really well drawn and composited. The photography team,
Shoutouts to Senshi for calling out the fire's multicolored element, right? It's not just one simple color of the fire. It's like a bright yellow, an orange, a red, and then an outer red flare, on the borders, right?
Photography team darkened some of these shots to give them a backlit look. They also added this wobbly heat wave effect. These additions really helped sell the heat. Also, these monster drawings were absolutely phenomenal. Look at the fabric animations, so good.
Fabric animation on Tusk's, on his hood. And he was already showing his hair, so I shouldn't have been shocked that he actually had hair. Someone said, look up Tensura Rigard and put him beside Tusk with hair. And I'm like, no wonder I thought he looked familiar. It's our fucking goblin people, man. It is.
Fabric animations, so good. We then got to the second major animation highlight from this episode, and this one was almost certainly animated by Takafumi Tori. The timing and the effect shapes make that obvious. We got this incredibly...
I loved it. No reason to swap the dagger mid-air hand, but he did. And again, the reflection in the dagger showing Tusk shitting his pants.
Incredibly snappy, exaggerated cut. The perspective work was insane.
That's right. The perspective of Jimu's cock in the air. Even like this, right? The light that appears. Leading into it. What starts it, right? Boom, 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 boom. Grabs it. Turns around. And then from above, there's like a bright light. Boom! Right there. That's really sick. It makes it pop. Makes it stand out. Makes it, what's some other words? Electric. That's right. This is a very electrifying moment.
Happy exaggerated cut. The perspective work was insane. This was actually the third shot of this kind from...
Yeah, they love this cut. Yeah. The cock angle. I'm gonna call this the descending cock camera work angle. Sure, why not?
This episode, so I guess Kikuchi loves this particular composition.
The Kikuchi cock. I crown it the Kikuchi cock. Extra volumetric angle coming from above to really sell the force, the weight of the cock coming down.
Also loved the reflection on the dagger. It was such a cool addition. Like I said, the perspectives were exaggerated and the timing, complete with these Kanada-esque...
Okay, this... I don't know why this scene just looks so sus. Yeah, you can see the ass crack. You cheeks separated. Nice.
Kinetic lines was incredible. The monster drawings, as you'd expect, looked amazing, and we got more 3D aided camera work. I will say this, the background during this section
Kind of awkward with the flames in the ground.
looked too busy, and that, coupled with the erratic animation, made the shot difficult to follow. Very strong drawings though, and those thick sparks were classic Tori.
Love it.
Although this zoom in could have used an extra frame or two. The final bit of action, as you'd expect, was incredibly dynamic. We got more of that camera work. This low angle shot looked amazing, and the camera wrapping around the arc looked so good.
Attack
This
on
shot in
Titan-esque.
particular was great. The hypothetical
Yo, the chains here looked amazing. Look at the chains. Love the wind animation too, right? The gust of wind that shows extra movement as the volumetric camera angle, right? It's spinning around the room like that, but the chains, it's so shiny and detailed and polished.
was great. The hypothetical camera was fixed, and movement was conveyed through the relative motion of the background. If all of that wasn't insane enough, they threw in some decent hand-to-hand combat near the end. The action here felt energetic, and the debris in particular looked amazing.
Yeah, love the little, you know, the debris open up, right? Look at the, it's not the cubes, it's a, I mean, this pretty much is like kind of cube-like, right? But this whole sequence with like Tusk, his final stand, you could feel the desperation in each play. His facial emotion too, I think, really sold it. His facial emotion, his desperation, his hand-to-hand combat, Denkin-like, ooh, look at that. And like each clash with that little ring of light, you see that, right? Clash, boom, ring of light, shows the impacts.
Near the end. The action here felt energetic, and the debris in particular looked amazing. Again, I've said this before, but these characters are not easy to animate. And finally, we got a Hajime Nakagawa sequence.
Okay.
He decided to animate a relatively laid-back scene, this time around, surprisingly enough. As per usual, his art style with the distinct shading and the block-like shapes looked amazing. It looks like someone took the 2D characters and crumpled the paper they were drawn on. That's a compliment, by the way.
Crumpled it. So this is something that Hajime guy does really distinctly. Let's see. What is so unique
He
here?
decided to animate a relevant fight. Again, I've said this before, but these characters are not easy to animate. And finally, we got a Hajime Nakagawa sequence. He decided to animate a relatively laid-back scene, this time around, surprisingly enough. As per usual, his art style with the distinct shading and the block-like
Distinct shading. Can you tell the difference in different animators? It's blocky shading? What's blocky about this here? I see the blocky here. I see maybe a triangular blocky here. This one's more thin. Is this blocky though? Right over here, like this. That stands out though? It's polygon blocky like shading. Okay.
and the block-like shapes looked
Block-like shapes too. What's blocky here? The ground? I don't know. I have a hard time recognizing how different, but I did notice the shadowings, the shadows. Jimu's design looks more blocky here. His cheeks are blocky. Yes, I still see his ass. Yes, I see him.
looked amazing. It looks like someone took the 2D characters and crumpled the paper they were drawn on. That's a compliment, by the way. So good. And that was the episode. It looked amazing. It was an ambitious undertaking, and the execution was great. Like I said near the start, this was a high priority episode, and normally I wouldn't be surprised if this was the best this season had to offer, but based on what I've heard, the
Takeuchi has not come out to play just yet. He too busy fucking around in villainous OG-san.
There are at least a couple of upcoming episodes worth looking forward to, meaning I'll probably end up making more of these videos.
Yeah.
And that should just about do it. Press the like button if you
Thank you, Mr. Probably Pretentious, for the breakdown. I hope you guys understood the different things that he was saying, and at the very least, if you didn't understand, maybe we're able to follow my monkey eyes and try to figure out what he is saying. Through these videos, you too can awaken your third eye and become volumetrically dynamic. See you next time.